Hey guys, we're going to give everyone a couple minutes to jump in here, and then we are going to get started with Alice giving us a presentation on Docker. People, one more minute to join in, and then Alice, you can kick it off.
Alice is here?
Hello. Alice is here and is going to give us a quick presentation on Docker, which I know was a requested topic after Gus got you guys set up in it.
Sweet. Hi, Alice.
How's it going?
Good. Excellent. Alice, I'll Slack you because I made an appointment in your schedule, but I don't know if you are planning on being around this weekend. And
oh, yep, I saw it. I'll be around.
You're sure? Okay, I forgot about the whole holiday thing. And
yeah, no worries.
Excellent.
All right, Alice, if you want to get started by sharing your screen, I do have the YouTube live stream set up on my side. So as soon as you start the sharing your screen for your slides, we should be broadcasting that to YouTube as well.
Okay, give me 1 second because I just realized that Zoom hates my OS. So
okay.
Sorry, let me put it to another computer real quick.
Sure, no problem.
Zoom hates my Chrome.
Okay. Yeah. I'll be right back.
Yeah, I've definitely found that the Zoom app, if you download the Zoom app, it works a lot better than if you join in just Chrome.
Yeah, I had the app and Chrome simultaneously Zooming, and I couldn't figure out why the app was not muting. It was because Chrome was, yeah, well.
I don't want plastic one. That's when I got my 5 to 12.
I just posted a link in CIC Student Resources to Alice's slides that she's going to go over while we wait for her to get set up.
Sure. Okay, I'm back. All right, let me open the slides. Okay. Can you see my slides?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit about Docker. What's a container? So A container is a standard unit of software that packages up all code and all its dependencies so the application runs quickly and reliably from one computing environment to another. So what does that mean? So think back to when we were getting set up with Node.js for the first time. We had to do things like install Node and install a bunch of packages, and kind of writing the code is implied because we were developing the thing. But if we wanted to run it, we wouldn't necessarily want to, download the code and then run it with Node or Nodemon. So that's where containers come in. It's an easy way to get your application, all of it. So not just your code, but its dependencies, the server it's running on, so Node in this case, and then run it quickly. And then not only does it run it quickly, but you can also take up your container that's running your application and then just give it to anybody else. So it makes deployment really easily. So you don't have to worry about, say, if you want to give your website to your friend to run and they don't have Node installed and they have to go install Node and make sure they have all your dependencies and the versions match up. You can say, hey, install Docker, and then give them your Docker container and they can run it, no problem. So any questions on that before we move on to a bit of the history?
Alice, are you on slide 2 right now or on slide 1?
I am on slide 2. Did it not move?
It did not. I believe you are frozen on 1.
That's unfortunate.
Would you like me to share the slides from my computer and you can just tell me when to advance them, or are you going to do a code demo as well?
I was going to do a code demo as well, though I don't know if that's going to work as much because we're on Windows. I don't know if I have Docker installed on this machine.
Gotcha.
I do not.
Maybe try stopping the share and starting it one more time.
Sure.
And the other thing that we find works pretty well is try sharing the whole desktop instead of just the one Chrome window. That also might help.
Gotcha. Okay. Give me one moment here. That is right in here. Okay. Starting up the share again right now. Oh, I'm muted. Oops. Am I muted?
You are not muted. We can hear you.
Okay, fine. It shows I'm muted up in the Zoom meeting window. Okay, never mind. It's okay. Okay, sharing screen.
There we go.
Nice. Would anybody like me to go over this again so you can see it, or are we good to move on?
I have a question.
Sure.
So when you say no dependencies, it's like, so if like I don't have to install any software as long as I have Docker will just take care of it itself.
Yep, 100%. As long as it doesn't depend on something like another container, in which case you just have to install that other container.
Wow.
So to answer your question a little bit more, is the idea is that you would definitely have to set up your Docker once and get the dependencies set up. And you can get those dependencies set up using containers. However, once you have it set up, you can kind of distribute that to other people or fire it up down the road. And because it's all running in one container, they're all kind of siloed independently of each other.
Right, sorry, okay. Yes. You do have to set it up the first time. You can't just use Docker to run everything and it'll automatically figure it out. I can show you a Docker file later on that will make this a bit more clear.
And that setup is like installing the Postgres image, something like that.
Yeah. So in Docker files, you can do, it'll be a bit easier when I'm showing you later, but you can essentially say from a Docker file. So you can say from Postgres, and that would give you a Postgres container to work with. In our case, we probably just want to run a separate, instead of installing all our dependencies in one specific container, we'd want to have separate containers for all our parts of our project. So you'd have one container that runs your server and another container that runs your database, for example.
Oh, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else? Okay, moving on. My animations don't play. That's fine. So let's talk a little about where containers came from. So back in late 70s, early 80s, there's a new command called chroot. This basically lets you change the root directory of a file. So say you want to run a program on a Linux computer. And in Linux computers, all the libraries basically come from the maintainers of the repo. So you're pretty much locked into what versions they give you, unless you go and do some special setup yourself. But instead of doing that, which could potentially break your installation, you could create something called a chroot. So you could make a whole new root directory for your application. You could chroot into it, and then you could set up all your libraries that you need for that application without poisoning your host system. So it effectively isolates it from the rest of the system so you don't break any of your other dependencies. That kind of led us to Bfc Jails, which is the next big step in the space. It creates a whole new virtualized system with its own IP addresses and services separate from the host systems. So this is getting a bit closer to what you see in a standard Docker container these days. Like we could, if you remember back to Gus's week, we were able to get a terminal up on the Postgres container. And it was running all the services you expect to see on a standard Linux machine. Had networking enabled, disk I/O, stuff like that. And kind of, we see that starting to set the groundwork for what we'd expect to see out of Docker. The next thing that comes up is process containers in 2008. These were developed by Google. They provide a unified interface for controlling the resources available to a group of all processes called a control group. This was later renamed as C groups because there's a lot of different definitions for what a container could be, so they want to specifically say what it was doing. In this case, controlling the resources available to a bunch of different processes. This gives you an easy way to set up the isolation between your applications and containers, which is something you definitely want if you don't want, say, somebody's application to mess with memory space that somebody else's application is using. It's good to keep everything separate, which allows you to do have a bit more security over running everything together. Next on the scene is Linux containers, which showed up a bit later, like a few months. LXC was kind of like the first version of containers I used. Back when I was first using them, I thought they were just like a standard virtual machine. So I was pretty surprised to learn that, no, this is all just using stuff built right into the Linux kernel. So that's built using C groups and namespaces to separate the containers from each other. Basically indistinguishable from running on a host system. And then finally, that was pretty close. It gave you an interface to use, but it still didn't make it super easy to like build out a config file and give that to somebody else to run. finally we get to Docker. So Docker was announced at PyCon in 2013. It was originally built using LXC. Then it got libcontainer in 2014, which was another joint project between Docker and Google. Google actually had another thing after LXC called Let Me Container That For You, or Let Me Contain That For You. That was pretty much stopped in favor of libcontainer and Docker. So it's similar to LXC and other containerization software before it. It uses Linux namespaces and C groups to separate the application environments. But then like I was saying before, benefit over LXC offers a full ecosystem, not just for like managing containers on your system, but also making it easy to pull containers from repositories. So instead of worrying about getting configuration and making sure it builds correctly on your system, you can just say Docker pull Postgres, and it will just pull down the base Postgres image that's available to you. So if anybody wants to like take a deeper dive into how containers actually work, these two talks here, What Have Namespaces Done For You Lately by Liz Rice and C Group's Namespaces Beyond, What Are Containers Made Of by Jerome Pedizzoni. They're both very good resources to see kind of at a lower level how containers are built. I'm especially a big fan of Liz Rice's talk because she gives you code to actually run your own containers. That it's like, when I say run your own containers, like make your own containers using the C groups and namespaces to see exactly how those things are built. Definitely not necessary, but if you think it's cool, I'd say check it out. So why are containers good for you? So think about your capstone, right? I don't know. Think about if you said, hey, Alice, thanks for hosting all of our capstones for you, or for us. Here's the code, and run it. How much of a instruction set would you need to give me to run your capstone? I don't know how far anybody along is, but if anybody wants to like chime in and say what the steps needed to run their capstone are. If not, that's fine too. I can just move on.
What do you mean? Can you ask the question again?
Sorry, yeah. So if you wanted to give me your capstone to run on my computer, what would the steps be that I would have to take to run it?
I would have a container from my database and my server.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd have to download the images to each server. So I meant container, I think.
Oh, sorry. You'd be right if we were using containers, but this is even before containers. Like right now, your code as is. What would I have to do to start up your server and have it show a web page that I could use?
Oh, yeah. You'd have to have Node and all the dependencies in there. And then you'd have to have the database as well.
Right.
Yeah. To make sure all that is connected and talking.
Yep.
And then you have to be able to run it.
Exactly.
And then on top of that, you would also have to not only have the database installed, but also there's a lot of configuration for the database as well, right? So you'd have to create the database. Once you have the database server running, you would have to create a user account for that. And then you would have to make sure that your node configuration files use the same username, password, host, port, all of that fun stuff that your database is set up to use.
Yep.
That's a lot.
So, yeah, configuration on top of configuration. Then for our next slide, let's take it to the next step. I only have one computer, right? And I want to run everyone's capstones. So based on your what you said there, I would need everybody to have a Postgres instance, and everybody need to have a Node.js instance. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to spend hours configuring all of that. Especially since I would have, you can't really run multiple instances of Postgres. It'd be, I guess if you cluster them, but that's not really how it's meant to be run. each would have to be given its own separate port on my computer. So there's 13 students in the class, 12 students. So that'd be 12 or 13 instances of Postgres running, or one instance of Postgres running with all of your configuration applied to it. I have to hope that none of you use the same database names or usernames to connect to the database. Not to mention at that point too, there's like a risk of that kind of goes back to like the sandboxing thing. There's a risk of each of your applications interfering with each other's data. Ports too is another thing to worry about. Like we've been running our Node.js servers on like port 8080 or 8081. Only one of you can use that port, so everybody would have to like agree on which port they want to take. So coordinating all of that can be a mess, essentially. But with containers, that's greatly simplified. So you could all make a container for your project, and you could all make a Postgres container to give me. And when we do that, we can just give them all different host names, essentially. So we could say, let me take a step back. Docker gives its containers their own network to work with. So instead of needing to say localhost, for example, and referring just to your local computer, you can actually refer to each container inside your Docker instance by their host name. So we could say Dakir Postgres, or we could say Eva Postgres, or Catherine Postgres, and then we would know we could give each of your web apps that connection string with that host, and then they wouldn't interfere with each other. We wouldn't have to say just localhost and then give it a random port number based on which Postgres instance we were using. That would also make it so, say, generally, unless you're doing some magic with like a version manager of some kind, you can only run one version of Node.js on your system at a time. Imagine if, I know you've all like started your capstone about the same time, so there probably wouldn't be too much difference between your Node versions. But imagine I had a legacy project that needed Node version 4 for some example. A lot of your projects are probably using newer conventions from later Node versions that wouldn't be available in 4. So your projects would break, and if I tried to use the version of Node that your projects would need with my legacy project, it would also break. So by using containers, I can give my legacy Node app its own version, and each of your containers could have its own Node version, and they wouldn't interfere with each other. So really just makes managing dependencies so much easier than just having your host system trying to juggle everything itself. And something that comes up a lot in my line, or just programming in general, if you've ever, as soon as you start working, you'll see it definitely. But as soon as you try to give somebody else your code, it will never work on their machine the first try. I mean, sometimes it will, but a lot of times it won't. It's easy to expect that it just won't. So I'm sure you heard the phrase, well, it works on my machine. You don't have to deal with that anymore with containers because everything is packaged up nicely. Your colleague can just run your container, and it should work the same as it ran on your machine. So what are the steps to making your own Docker container? Step 1, you want to create a Docker file and a .docker ignore. Step 2, build your container. And step 3, run your container. And that's about all there is to it. There's some extra steps in there if you want to push to like a repository, but we're not going to be worrying about that today. Yeah, so let's make a container. Before we move on, anybody have any questions?
What does Docker ignore do?
So when you build a Docker container, anything inside the same folder and below where your Docker file is considered the Docker build root. So anything in there gets included in the Docker image. So when you do Docker ignore, you can exclude files you don't want to see. So node modules, for example, those are installed based on the system that's running.
Class is
So-
remote or virtual.
Sorry? Okay. Where was I? Node modules, right. So they're installed based on the host system that's installing them. So if you, say, install your node modules when you're trying to develop on your laptop, that would be different than the node modules your Docker container would need. So you don't want to include node modules. So you could put node modules in your Docker ignore, and then it wouldn't go into your Docker image. Does that make sense? Or
Yep, it does. Thanks.
yep. Anybody else? Okay.
Actually, Alice, it's Eva.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I understand this at the most basic level. So when you're talking about a container, I'm not only giving someone my code, I'm giving them all the things I use to make it. That's also my development environment, my dev environment, right?
Nope. You would ideally only want to give them what they would need to run your.
My code.
Yes.
Right. So it's like a box that I built it in, kind of.
Yeah.
All the pieces. All right.
Yep.
And I didn't quite understand the ignore. So that's basically saying ignore the modules I've used in other projects. Just for this project. Or this piece of it.
Yeah, it'd be just like this piece of the folder you're in.
All right.
So anything you don't want to include in your Docker container, you'd want to hide in your Docker ignore file.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so I am super unprepared at the moment because I do not have Docker installed. Let's install Docker real quick. How long can this take? Docker.
So Docker is just like currently the most popular type of container?
At the moment, yeah, for probably developers to use.
Okay.
So there's also log into the okay. So there's also there's a newer piece of software called Kubernetes, and that was developed by Google. It's kind of like the next step after Docker.
Yeah.
So Docker is good for running containers, but say you're a large software company that, sorry, I'm trying to like do things, two things at once. So imagine you're like a large software company, right? And you have thousands of containers, let's say.
Right.
Running all of those with Docker commands, like Docker start, is probably going to get a little bit much, especially if you want to like do those, run them on a schedule. You could like edit your cron tab, but you'd have a gigantic cron tab, thousands of lines essentially. Cron tab is like, I don't know if you've done stuff with cron, but that cron is just a system for running programs on a scheduled timer.
Okay. We haven't, I don't think.
Gotcha. That's fine. Just think of it like a scheduler.
Why would you want that?
So say you have a task that cleans your database from dead data.
Okay. Yeah.
So you want that to run every hour. You could create a cron job that runs the command that cleans your database once an hour.
Cron job. I like that. Okay.
Yep. So Kubernetes makes it easier to manage all 1,000 Docker container instances you'd need to run. It's getting up really high level, though. That's generally nothing that we would ever need to look at unless we're running a large distributed software system.
Okay.
This is a tangent, but can you speak to Kubernetes a little bit? I was asked about it a while ago.
Oh, really? What was like the context of it?
They were like, "Hey, can you put my website?" I was like, "I don't know. See me after August." And he was like, "Hey, do you know about Kubernetes?" And I was like, "No." And then the conversation stopped. Like, I think they thought I wasn't legit because I was like, I didn't know it or something like that.
Okay, that's a weird flex, but sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, cloud native technologies, you'd have to get into that a little bit. So instead of running servers, you want to run containers. So you still need servers on the back end somewheres, right? To run those containers. You don't just have like a container, you have to have a computer that runs your container software, and then also that software runs the containers. What Kubernetes does is it lets you take all your servers, build them into like a big farm, and then Kubernetes will just take your container config file, like the thing that says what your job is, and it will automatically assign your job to any, I forget what they call it. I think it's a pod. If I'm getting more notes about Kubernetes than me, if they can chime in. Basically, it's just whatever unit of server they use. So it assigns your job to a different pod, and it makes it so you don't have to worry about where your container is running. You just have to worry about running your container.
So let me simplify that down a little bit. So Docker is for setting up these containers, right? And you can think of a container almost as a virtual machine. It is a silo of all your code. Those containers are based off of images, right? So the image is going to be Postgres, or your image might be Node. And so basically you have two ways of setting up your Docker. You can either run multiple containers, so one for Node, one for Postgres, and link them all together, or you can set up one big container to run all of your dependencies all together. Is that correct, Alice?
Yep.
So a common reason to use Docker is that when you set up all of your files and you install all of your dependencies might not necessarily be in Node. They might be Postgres, they might be something to do with the file system. There might be a lot of different things, a lot of different dependencies. So if you use Docker, you could create one container, install all of your dependencies into that one container, and use just that. Then the step after that is, hey, Docker is great and it's great for developers, but wouldn't it be great if we could use that same technology to deploy our code as well? So when it goes up to an actual web server like Google Cloud Platform or AWS from Amazon or Microsoft Azure, you could just run the code there as well. And they tried to do that, but they ran into some issues with scaling Docker, because you might need several hundred or thousand containers running on your server. And so Google came up with this technology called Kubernetes, which specifically focuses on the containerization, which is what Docker does well on desktop, but they took it to the server and they said, hey, it's great that you can run a couple of these containers, but you might need to run thousands of them if you have millions of users. Managing all of those thousands and thousands of containers doesn't work well in Docker. So Kubernetes is the next step after that. Kubernetes is just a management platform that allows you to still use containers and still get all the goodness of Docker. However, it's specifically built to be run at the server level.
Makes sense. Thank you.
So one thing while Alice is still getting set up here is when I first came into my company, they gave me a GitHub repo and they said, here, go, here's all the code. And there was no README, there was no anything, right? So I set up the code, I went to run it and didn't run. I got an error and it said module is not installed. So I went, okay, well, let me go install that module. So I installed that one and I got another error, cannot connect to Mongo server. So I thought I set up my Mongo server, but then I ran into an issue of, oh, the configuration wasn't set right. So I had to change the host and the port and get the username and password right. And then I had to go import that Mongo database. And then I got that far and couldn't get, I had another issue where I had to get Postgres set up. So I had to do all of that. And eventually I got to the point where I had it all working and I'm like, this is great. And it was written in Django and Python 2. So I'm like, everything was working, everything was great. And then I went to install another project that another developer at the company had built, and it ran on Python 3. So all of a sudden, as soon as I installed Python 3, it overwrote my Python 2, and the other project that was running great no longer worked. So I went, crap. So all of those problems could be avoided if we had a Docker container. And what we would do is the way that I would have it set up, you could have run it across multiple containers, but I prefer to do project level containers. So, hey, this project is one container, and there is a Docker file that says, hey, here are all of the images that you need to run this Docker file. And those images specify a version as well. So it goes, hey, you need Postgres, but Postgres at this version. And you also need Node installed, and you need Node at this version. And oh, by the way, Postgres needs to be configured to run on this port and have this username and password. So you can set all of that up in your Docker file to say basically, hey, when you go run this container, we're going to base it off these images. We're going to pull in Postgres. We're going to pull in Node, right? Our basic dependencies. And then we're going to use our Docker file to set up all of the things that need to be set up. So we're going to set up your Postgres, and we're going to tell it to run on this IP address. And so once all of that is properly configured, I could send that Docker file and that directory to one of my colleagues, or even better, commit it into Git. And when I download it, I can just run one Docker command. It's going to look at my Docker file. It's going to install everything that I need. And then when I turn on that Docker container, it's going to essentially act as another computer. And I can have multiple containers, or essentially multiple virtual computers, or as the industry calls them, virtual machines, running all independently of each other that aren't going to mix with each other, but because of that, I can run multiple of them. Now, I am not a Docker expert, so Alice, feel free to correct me on any of that.
So I just want to make sure. So it kind of, if I'm working on a project and as I, over a long-term period of time, and as I start a new module, say there's an upgrade or a new version of Postgres or whatever I'm using, I can use it for my new module and not worry about changing it in other pieces. And I'm giving basically, when I give it to another machine, I'm also basically giving them a snapshot of what I was using at that time. I'm giving them what they need to be able to run it. They don't have to have anything on their own machines.
Well, they would need Docker installed.
Docker, okay.
Because Docker, think of Docker as kind of the operating system, right? So Docker is required to make any of the Docker containers work.
Right.
But once they have that installed, they would be able to get your Docker file. And I believe the Docker file includes all of the images that you need to make that Docker file work.
What do you mean by images exactly?
So the image is like a package in NPM. It's like your base thing to install. And it also includes the version number.
Okay.
So
that's kind of like that snapshot.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Gotcha.
Is that correct, Alice? That the Docker file includes the images that you need?
Right.
Okay.
So you can give it a specific version number, or you can just give it like the base name and it'll find the latest tag. So latest refers to the most recent version of the image that's been pushed up to Docker Hub or your repository.
Okay.
So basically, we're building on top of each other, right? So we have Docker at the very bottom, and Docker needs to be installed. Then we have images on top of that, and images are like our packages. Like, what do we need to get this working? Then we have our Docker file on top of that, which is going to say what images that we need. And it's also going to have some other maybe configuration information in it. Hey, what does the server need to be set up to? What port does it need to be running? What username? All of that stuff. And then on top of all of that, on top of our Docker file, we would have our code that's actually running.
Okay. Yep, I understand.
Okay, let me just finish up this quick app real quick. I think I can just, no, that won't work. Okay, now if I open this in, okay, that's fine. Oh, that button does work. I'm not going to take this time to debug JavaScript. Okay, so let's get this in a Docker container. So first command we need, Docker build. So let's navigate to source repos.
Alice, is it possible to blow up the text in that terminal? I don't know if Control+ will work.
Doesn't look like it. Give me one moment. I think we can just increase the font size here. That's cursor size.
Yeah, that's much better. Thank you.
Nice. Okay. So we have our basic app. We can, this is just an index file. So we'll have to do a different, we'll have to install a Node.js project, or sorry, a Node.js, just a real basic Node.js server that can serve static files. But we can do that in our Docker file. Don't even need to do that on our host machine. Okay, so first things first, let's build a Docker file. Where did my code window go? Did I close it? I did not. Here we go. There is, if you ever want to install your own, if you ever want to run your own Docker files, there is a very nice Docker extension you can install. It seems to already be installed.
And can you Control+ on that, and that should just zoom up. You're perfect.
I'll make the window bigger. You know what? Side by side, no problems. Okay. So that's how we define our base image. And it's really simple. We just want Node. Cool thing that oh, that's not going to work, huh? No, there it does. Okay. Cool thing that the extension does, you can type out the base image you want to use. You can click it, bring you right to the Docker Hub page for it, so you can see the different tags and everything. So we can look at this. We can say, how do we want to use Node? Say we just want the latest LTS. I think we can just do LTS. So Node is the base image. We put a colon, and we want to specify the tag. Tag is just how you specify which version of Docker or which version of an image you want to use. I can show you how tags would work later on if when we get to that step. So get the latest. LTS stands for long-term support. So the most recent version of Node that's going to have the longest support generally, if you are starting with a new project, you'd want to start with this version, unless you had some reason not to. So we want to install a node module called, let's see, npm HTTP server. This is just a real basic HTTP server that'll let us run our index.html file. So to do that, we can use the run command. And run just basically means, hey, while you're building your Docker file, run a command. So we can say run npm install. Let's see. It's not going to like that we don't have a packets.json. Wait, real quick, is there an npm init we can do without? Let's see, skip config.
I think it's -y.
It is -y. Thank you. So we want to do run npm init -y and npm install HTTP server. Okay. That should get us everything we need to run npm server or HTTP server. Sorry. So the final thing we want to do is we want to set. Oh, sorry, not the final thing. So first step, got to create a working dir. So the work dir basically is just where the next run command will be run. So this is where we want our app to go. So let's say work dir, the app. Just throw it right in the root, no problems. So this will run in there. Then we can say add source. So in this case, /star. So that'll get everything in our current working directory. Source directory is going to be /the app. Excuse me. Finally, so now we have copied our project files into the project directory where it's going to be run from. We have HTTP server in the directory. We can say our command. Oh, another nice thing about this extension, if you want to get any documentation about a directive inside the file, you can just mouse over it. It'll tell you what you need to do. So we can say, let's see, npx. npx is how you do, it lets you run node modules that aren't installed globally, basically. So we can say npx, if we look at HTTP server, our path is just going to be index.html because we're in the same directory. And that should be that. Oops. No exclamation. Okay.
Do you need to specify HTTP server in that command?
Yep, you're right. Good call. Okay. No, I think that'll do it.
So let me just briefly go over that file one more time. So what we're doing is we're saying, hey, from node, so go out to Docker Hub, which is like the NPM website, and go get this thing called node. And then we do a colon and we say LTS. So basically go grab the latest version of node that isn't extremely cutting edge, which is what we mean by LTS. We could also put in a specific version number there if we wanted to lock it into that version. Then what we do is we say, hey, Docker needs to know where we're going to run these commands. So we set our working directory to /the app. So imagine that would be like telling our terminal to cd into the project directory that we want to work on. And then we run this command, run npm init. So we're basically setting up a blank node project. We use that -y because if we remember when we run npm init, it asks us a bunch of questions. But because Docker is going to run this automatically, we don't want it asking all of those questions. So we pass in this special flag called .y that basically says, hey, just make a blank package.json file. And then we're going to npm install a package, just like we normally do. Okay, all of that's great. Now Docker has a node container set up based off of that node image. It knows that it's working off this directory called the app, but there's nothing in the app yet except our package.json file. So what we're going to do is we're going to add, that star means wildcard. So add all of the files that are on my local computer in this Docker file container, which is just going to be index.html at this point. And where do we want to add them? We want to add them into our container in a folder called the app. So basically what we're saying is copy all the things that you find in this Docker file directory and any other files into my new container that we now have set up. Now, the last thing we want to do is we want to run a new command, just like we did with run. And what do we want to do? We want to run this command called HTTP server, and HTTP server needs to know what to serve. So HTTP server is going to serve index.html.
Sorry, the fire alarm near my house was going off. It's very loud. I don't know if you could hear it.
So this means, so like if I've got my capstone and I've done some coding on my HTML, my CSS and all that kind of stuff, now I'm just taking all those files and now they're all in my Docker file. So I could add the Docker file. I could have added the Docker file. I could have started that coding months ago, and now I'm just going to put it all in my Docker file so it's all there together.
Yep.
Okay. I just want to make sure I get the fundamental. I have the fundamentals in my head right. So I'm sorry if I keep asking seemingly basic questions, but it really helps me to put it in my head.
This Docker file is specifically configuring the container that we are setting up to run our code.
Okay.
Yep. So now that we have a Docker file, we can build our container. So to do that, we want to use the docker build command. Say docker build.h, and a list of all the flags it takes. We're just going to do this real simply. So we just want to do docker build-t. This will set your tag list. So if you look here, we can say name : tag, and that's essentially the same format we see up here. So name of the container node, tag is LTS. In this case, our name is just going to be basic app. And tag, we can just give it latest because we don't really care about a specific version. And just give it dot. Dot is a shorthand for your current directory, essentially. So anywhere you run this command in dot, it'll try and build a Docker container. So it's going to look for our Docker file and build it. So hit enter. Now we wait a little bit, pulls down the node image. We saw this same thing happen when we pulled Postgres down 2 weeks back.
So basically, we gave the config in the Docker file. Now when we say docker build, we're basically saying, hey, go run all of the things that I told you to do in the Docker file. So it would be like opening up your index.html, essentially. And then the -t basic app latest, we're just giving it a name. So when we go to manage this container down the road, we'll know what it's called.
Oops. Gets it down with this Docker host. That's okay. Don't need to worry about that. You won't see that message if you run this on OS X or Linux. This is just because we're on Windows. Okay, so let's run our, so we can say Docker images, and there we go. Here's our image, basic app, latest. So let's try, the next step is you want to run it, right? So that we can do Docker run. Okay. -- help, give us all our things we want, or all our flags we could possibly use. If you remember back to Postgres, the long command we have to run, thankfully, the only reason that was so long is because we had a lot of options added to it. This time we don't need so many options. So we can just say Docker run --rm. --rm means when we stop the container, it removes the container. If you don't have --rm, it will just try and, excuse me, it will leave the container up. So when you go to like create another Postgres container, for example, if you didn't have rm --rm in there, it'd be, you can't create this container. Postgres container already exists. So this just makes sure that it runs once and then deletes itself. Doesn't have to be long running. Then we can say, give it the name of the container, basic app, and finally, basic app LTS. And let me try and run that. Did I? Oh, because the LTS tag does not exist. Okay, server says it's running, right? Now, let's try and find it. Strange, doesn't seem to be running. And the reason it's not running is because none of our ports are open on a Docker container. So if you remember back when I was, oh, how loud are those sirens for everyone?
Not as bad as you would think.
Okay, that's good, because I can hear them through my noise canceling headphones.
I don't hear them at all.
Okay, excellent. That's what I like to hear. I like to hear the report of no sound. So if you remember back what I was saying before, how Docker containers all have their own network. And that's good because you don't necessarily want your containers to be able to be reached from the outside world, because that kind of breaks the whole sandboxing thing, the separation of processes that you want before. You don't want just Docker containers reaching out and touching your host network. So what we can do, we can stop this, and we can use the -p flag. If we look up here, we can say --publish, or -p or --publish, and then we give it a list. So basically that just means publish a container's port to the host. And in simpler terms, that just means, hey, take a port on our Docker container and open that port on the host machine. So we can use.
Basically, what's happening here is Docker it's like its own little computer, right? That container is running on its own, and by default, Docker blocks all the ports, and it goes, no, this computer isn't allowed to touch anything on the outside computer or on the outside world. So by using that -p, we're saying, hey, open up this port, this specific thing, go into your firewall essentially, and open up port 8080 and tell the host computer, your computer that is running the Docker container, that it is allowed to access port 8080.
Right. Okay, so let's try and run it again. Interesting. So apparently hitting Control-C there did not stop the container. Windows, it's fun. Okay.
So what we're doing here is we're just shutting down the container that we had running.
Oh, it stopped, so now it removes it. So if you look again, not there now. Okay, so if we go back to our window, refresh. We say index.html. Well,
do you need to specify the /the app in your Docker file?
shouldn't have to, because work directory makes it so that the command that's running, that sets the working directory for everything after it. So it should already be in the app. So if we do, let's see, Docker run, let's see, and then we want to say cat, let's see, bin shell c cat the app, oops, ls the app.
So because it's not working, we're trying to debug a little bit here, right? So if we do that -c at the end, we're basically saying, hey, run the command ls the app, and that's going to print out all the files that are in the app that copied in for us.
Right. So that's a handy thing about Docker containers. Even though in our Docker file we say the command that we want to run is npx http server index.html, we don't have to always run that command. If we want to, for debugging, it's helpful that we can run any command we put after /bin/ or after the Docker container name. Okay. I'm going to take Max's suggestion.
No promises, just an idea.
It's a good idea. I like it. So because we changed something in our Docker file, we now have to rebuild it. It's an important thing to always remember to rebuild after you change your Docker file. Otherwise, you're going to pull your hair out wondering, why isn't the thing I tried to do making any difference? All right. And we'll come back to here. We'll refresh. That's fun. Let me make sure that I got my HTTP server arguments correctly.
It looks like HTTP server wants a folder path.
Oh, you're right.
File.
That's a good point. Stop, rebuild, run. Oops. Run. Hooray. Good call. So what we have here, basically, we have a Docker container that is running our project, essentially. It's really basic, but it is our project. So something cool we can do now. Let me make a slight change to this. I'm going to call this, let's see, it's to hello from V2. All right. I'm going to kill this. Let's run a new thing, but let's give it a different tag. Let's see, V2. Great. Actually, hold on. Sorry, I have to do one more small thing here. So I can remove this again. Let's see. Sorry, this isn't going to work as I thought it would. I need JavaScript for that. Oops.
We can wrap it up here if you want. That's okay.
Yeah. Basically, I was going to demonstrate that you can call another container, or you can connect to another container by its host name inside of the Docker container. Actually, I can show that real easy. So let's see. I'm gonna call this basic app 1. Create another one called basic app 2. And we're just going to drop into a bash shell. Let's see, -it. Oop. Bin bash. Oops. Let's get rid of the port directory. Okay, so in the app, we can say we'll do IP address. We can see the, it's not IP address. Okay, never mind that. Basically, we can just ping basic app 1. So this, let's see, we can do cat, or let's see if I do wget. Oh, yeah. See, sorry, let me just basic app 1. Probably gotta give it the port too. Well, if I had prepared for this more, this would work. Basically, when you're inside the Docker network, so basically container-to-container communications, you can just refer to another container by name. So if you want to, say, connect to your Postgres container, it's named Postgres from your node project. Instead of putting localhost in your connection string for Postgres, you can just put Postgres. And as long as you're running it as as long as you're running both containers, you should be able to connect to it just fine. Yep. So that's basically it for me. Just a few more resources if you're interested. If you want to try Docker out online without having to install anything, there's a Docker fundamentals course you can go to. The second link is a very fun talk about running all of your applications on your desktop in Docker containers, so nothing is really installed to the host system. Reference to Docker file layout, as well as best practices, and finally, a basic tutorial on containerizing your Node.js web apps. All right, so there we go. Any questions? All right, guess we're all set.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Alice. Really appreciate you going in depth with Docker. If anyone has any questions, I'm sure they can Slack you directly.
Yep, feel free to.
From there.
Yep,
Perfect.
anytime. All right.
Thanks so much. You have a good night, Alice.
Thanks, you too.
Okay, so we're gonna open the floor up to questions about your capstone. I'm happy to share my screen and go over any questions that you may have either from this week, because this is going to be kind of a joint office hour session, or we can focus on your capstone questions as well. Or if anyone has questions about Docker and why you would use it, or to go over what we just did, happy to answer those questions as well.
Okay, so when you're building a project, Max, do you start, I mean, ideally you would obviously know everything you were going to use and do, but like, how do you go about configuring just all of your containers and all of that kind of stuff? Like, do you plan that out much like data modeling, or is that something you add as you go? Or
Yeah, so it's something that I personally don't use Docker at work. And the reason for that is all of our projects run on the same version of Node in MySQL. So whenever we do an upgrade to either our MySQL or Node, we make sure that all of our projects are updated to those versions. The other major reason why we don't use Docker is I'm usually the only developer working on our code. So when other developers need to run our code, it is a little bit harder for them because we don't have Docker. With that said, the proper flow would be to get your Docker file set up and kind of identify at a high level what dependencies you're going to have before you dive into the project. So you go, okay, I'm going to need a database. Let me spend the time before I jump into this project and decide if I'm going to use Postgres or Mongo or MySQL or whatever it may be. An important note on Docker is that you don't need to have all of your NPM modules installed. NPM kind of manages itself. So you don't have to do much in Docker to get your NPM working. So you can always add dependencies down the road. But with your core in terms of what you're going to need into your Docker file, it's going to be those bigger dependencies that are outside of NPM, like Postgres. That's what you want to figure out and plan in advance before you write out your code and get your Docker container up and running. Because that means that if you do get it up and running, when you send me your code, I just have to build your Docker file and then have that Docker container running in order for me to access any of your code.
okay.
With that said, Docker is completely optional. And as you guys are working on independent modules, where it's not going to matter much if you, because most of your dependencies are in Node, you don't have to worry too much about it. So Docker is something that we definitely want to expose you to now. So when you get out into the workforce, you're a little bit familiar with it or why you would use it. Don't need to be a Docker expert. And I would say up until this point, you don't really need Docker. But when you start getting into managing your database and having multiple projects running at the same time, that's when you start to have more of a need for Docker.
And you can take questions about Capstone. Let me know because I have several.
Sure, whenever you're ready.
Okay. I think I heard some clarification last night, but I wanted to re-clarify what I think I heard. I have, let's see, if we want to, on demo day, I think is it the 22nd, if we have a portfolio of work that isn't necessarily, have a huge back end, for example, is this adequate if it's good? Or do we need to demonstrate both the full stack front and back end?
Yeah, so depending on what kind of role you're going for at these different companies, there is a huge demand for front-end developers. There is an even larger demand for full stack developers. So it's definitely important to show that you have that full stack experience. And the best way to do that is with a personal website that's going to look like a portfolio. And have maybe different screenshots of your different front ends that you've built. Link that to your GitHub as well with several different repositories for all of that code. While ideally your capstone project would be showing full stack work, it's also completely fine to have your portfolio that is showing predominantly front end work.
Okay, next question based on that. Thank you. Awesome. I have 3 different GitHub places, and I need one, obviously. When we started class, I had a pre-existing GitHub account that is not called anything professional. So I'm just been using both. I don't know if there's a way to merge or except just upload things from one to the other.
Yeah, that's going to be your easiest way.
Right.
Is I would download all of them from the other 2 accounts. I would make sure that you delete that account because GitHub does tend to be a little bit of a social network for developers.
Yeah.
And so if someone is searching for you and you come up with 3 different usernames, they might not be able to find you. So what I would encourage you to do is download your code from the other 2, go to settings, dig around in settings. There is an option to delete your account somewhere. Right. Delete the 2 old accounts, and then on your latest account, go ahead and create new repositories and upload all the code from the other 2 accounts.
Okay, good. Third question. I have some jobs already too. They're on Nation Builder. And one of them, I'm in their sandbox as a free experimenter, whatever. But for the professional job I have, my new employer, whatever, gave them my Proton Mail email. But what I read in Nation Builder, it said this: if your email is connected to anything, we will, we will list this as part of your profile. Should I get a new email address and have them start fresh before Nation Builder starts grabbing, Twitter handles that are also attached to this email address?
I'm not familiar with that platform, so I wouldn't feel comfortable giving you an answer.
I think the answer is probably still, when it says it's going to grab any accounts associated with your email address, it might be best to either change email address or, start fresh. But I was hoping do you know Proton Mail?
I don't. No, I'm not familiar with them.
I was hoping I could avoid them sharing anything, but.
It sounds like to me that they want to link you they want to get social networks linked into their platform. So they're going to take any of their user accounts and they're not going to go to Proton Mail to get that information. They're going to go probably directly to the social networks and say, hey, do you have any users with this email address? And then let's pull in that data.
Thank you. That's how the thinking works. Okay, good. I think I could still just get rid of the social media or just reassign it to a different email address. I just have a lot of domain names and reserved social media sites. Okay, third question. Doing a capstone demo day without money. How to show something beyond static.
Beyond a static website, you mean?
I'm just trying to figure out how to do it. Like, I have no money for hosting. Is there a way to do everything without cash? Besides on Tor or the blockchain or?
So on demo day, it's going to be completely fine to run your code locally. Their employers aren't going to necessarily be looking for code running on a server. It would be great if you did have that done. I would talk to Jesse when he gets back next week about your stipend, and maybe you can get the hosting set up on the stipend maybe fronted.
I actually tried that with Jason. I don't think they want to do that. So
I would check specifically with Jesse.
Okay.
Jesse has, I think, a little bit more authority. So I would check with him directly and, lay out your situation because I believe next week we're going to start playing around with DigitalOcean, which is a back-end web host. With that said, there are some free options out there.
That was my question. There's so many. Like,
Yeah, so there's GitHub Pages is one of them. Netlify is another. Those are only
they're limited.
those are only static website hosts. With that said, you can definitely get your portfolio website up there and show all the front end code that you've already developed on a site like GitHub Pages or Netlify. So my website, my maxmathe.ws is hosted all on Netlify. And if you look at that, you don't go, oh, this is a static website, or oh, this is limited. It does look very interactive. And it is. It's just all of that code doesn't require any server-side code to run.
Right.
So it is totally
Your
possible.
site, specifically, your home website, your name.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that? Oh, that's. I saw. It's amazing. But, and I can copy it. I wouldn't. But.
Well, that's why I open sourced it, right?
Replicable. Exactly. I just no, thank you. I will talk to Jesse, but I can also. I'm trying to find people who can give me loans just for short time. But I think I had one more question, but I don't want to hog time. Other than merging GitHub's Nation Builder and the home website portfolio, I already started with yours and started adding. Of course, I wouldn't just copy.
Well, and I have a credits page on my own website because I didn't make those graphics. I got those graphics for free. I made sure they were licensed open source so that I had permission to use them. And then that theme, I did not make that theme myself with the buttons at the bottom and the circle and the lines. And so that was another open source GitHub project that I found. And so I kind of put the backgrounds in and I kind of cobbled it all together myself.
Great.
But that's the whole point of the credits page is so anyone else, if anyone else wants to use my website as a base, they're welcome to take it and then just add my website in as a credit.
Great. Cool. All right. Best way to show if you're showing skills. I'm sorry, one more question. Capstone, if you want to show skills like on Nation Builder, I had to take apart a PDF and turn it into they had a link to a PDF that looked like crap and wanted to turn it into a web page that was more interactive, more just better than the PDF. I found a bunch of different tools and had to like choose different options. Do you know, I'm just looking for like a master list of the best, tools for doing stuff like this, but it's hard to know who to trust and what websites are giving you good information and what's your go-to for things like this.
So you're looking to convert a PDF into a web page, or what are you trying to do?
I wanted the text, I wanted the image, I wanted the text boxes. Yeah, the PDF had a lot of images that, Stack Overflow doesn't have a good, or Stack doesn't have a good Nation Builder site.
Okay.
But they have, because most of Nation Builder is, you have to know how to code more than you have to know, it's not as much of a WordPress where it's like.
Okay. So the PDFs are tough. The best thing I can do is recommend that you get in touch with the client and say, hey, I know you want this PDF up on your site, but do you have the original source images?
I do. Yeah.
Okay. So at that point, I wouldn't focus on tools to convert out of a PDF. PDF is really designed for print, and there's not really going to be any good tool out there for converting it into a web.
Thank you for confirming that what I've learned, that it still looks like, yeah, okay.
There will be plenty of tools that try and do that because, because on paper, that's a great idea. Right. I have this PDF. I just want it up on the web. The way I have found the best way to display PDFs on the web is don't hide the fact that it's a PDF.
Right.
So, on my website, I have a link to my resume and it's just a PDF. And when you download the PDF, it comes out as a PDF. And that's intentional because I want people to be able to print my resume easily. And I want to make sure that the formatting holds true. With that said, there are a bunch of things on my website that I wouldn't want to show up as a PDF, right? I don't want the contact form to be a PDF, or I don't want all of my social media links to be a PDF. So because of that, I have had to build out my website completely separate from the PDF. And it's important to relay that to the client as well and say, hey, I know you want this PDF on your website, and we can just throw it up there as a stopgap solution, but we should really talk about building this out. It's not about converting the PDF.
Right.
It's about using the content that's in a PDF to create a new page.
Excellent, because we have that, and like you said, the tools to extract images and text widely vary and look also like, yeah. So thank you, because I have the original images too, or access. So thank you. I'll go away now. Perfect.
Other questions?
For me, I was just wondering if you could go over the incorporating whatever I had. Like I asked this yesterday, so I have like a few HTML or designs done for my capstone, and I was wondering how I could incorporate that into Meteor or
Sure.
margin.
So I'm downloading your files right now.
Okay. Yeah, so I just sent like a simple Navbar. I was working on it, but it's not my actual capstone project. It's just something that.
That's fine. I will pop this open. It is a very large file, so I'm kind of curious.
Not the other one. Like it says Navbar.
Both of them are 295 meg.
Really?
Which I'm kind of curious to open it and see how it got so big.
Oh, I get it. I downloaded a few images from. Yeah, I'll move those out. And,
it's okay. You know what? I have fast internet. I already have it open.
Okay.
Yeah, it does appear that the big file in there was just an image. Okay, so let's go ahead and open this, and then I will start a screen share. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do is identify that without a doubt, you definitely want to be using Meteor and you definitely want to be using React. There are ways of using Meteor without React and using something that's closer to straight up HTML.
Mm-hmm.
There are also obviously other alternatives to Meteor. So you could use Express, you could use other things. But with that said, just for the purposes of demonstration, I'm going to assume that we want to use Meteor and React, and we want to combine these two code bases together. So I'm sharing my monitor. I know it looks a little tiny. As I go and open things up, I will blow them up so you can see them a little better. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the Navbar code in Visual Studio Code. And I'm just going to open up index.html and say, just edit a file quickly and refresh it and make sure it did change. So it did show that exclamation point, and blow that up. I'm also going to open up the other project that you sent me, which was the feedback app that we've been working on.
Yeah, with that, I tried. It's actually it's exactly what you did in class, and because I was doing my own and I couldn't get it to run on my computer, so I don't know what's happening or what I'm missing exactly. So I downloaded yours, and it also didn't run. So
okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the file that you sent me directly.
Okay.
And what it's doing is it's saying unable to resolve some modules. So now I'm a little curious on that. So what's happening is when I installed Moment,
Mhm.
I forgot to install it with --save. So because of that, it didn't get added to my dependencies list. So I'm going to stop my server. I'm going to install Moment, and this time I am going to do it with that --save.
Mhm.
And you notice what pops in here is it did add Moment to my dependencies. So if I rerun my Meteor command spelled right, hopefully it's going to turn on. Okay, so now it booted up. By the way, I will fix that. Actually, I'm going to do that right now in case anyone else is pulling my Meteor code and going, why is this not working? I want to add Moment to that package.json before I forget. Oh, it is in mine. That's weird. And it looks like it's committed. Give me 1 second. I just want to look on GitHub to see if it got committed right. Sometimes when you're not comfortable with Git or you think something might be off, the best place to go look is at GitHub itself, because they have a good file system for looking at things. And it does look like I have Moment installed here as well. So I'm wondering if you maybe just downloaded an old version.
Maybe, possibly.
But okay, that's fine. So let's talk about combining this code. So we have this code working. We have this blue navbar at the top. We have below the header, and we go, all right, we want to get this working in Meteor. The way you integrate this into Express is going to be different than the way you integrate this into Meteor, which is going to be slightly different than if you were to integrate this with React. So there is no silver bullet for how to do this. With that said, it is completely possible. So I'm going to realize that I closed my Meteor project. So I'm going to open that back up. And I did that in downloads feedback. I'm going to fire up my Meteor server again. And I'm going to go back to localhost 3000 and make sure I can access my Meteor server, which I can. I have my hello world and my sign in. So we have an option to make here. We can either delete out all the code that's in this app. We could start over with a completely blank Meteor app. And the benefit of doing that is we would be connecting to a different database. And we wouldn't have a bunch of unnecessary code or packages installed. Or the third option, which I think I'm going to do, is get this code working on another root. So we're going to leave the existing code as is. And just like we have, if we go into our imports and UI, we have our roots file. And we have our hello world, right? So if we go to /hello world, we still see it here. So what I'm going to do is I want to get this page working on a root called /navbar. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file called navbar.js. And I'm going to go to code that I already have working. Let's just take our hello world code because it's the simplest. And I'm going to paste it in here. Now, we may run into some issues because this code might not be using Bootstrap and this code might be. But the first step is to just give it a try and see what happens. So I'm going to change my class to navbar. I'm going to go back to my roots file and I'm going to import navbar from the file called navbar. And then I'm going to create a new root called navbar that uses the component navbar.
I see.
Okay, so now that I'm here, I'm going to make sure I'm still on my Meteor server. I'm going to go to /navbar, and we have this blank page. And if I come in here and do an H1 that says hi, because I bet you guys are sick of Hello World by now. If I come in here and refresh, I see my hi that comes up. Okay, great. So we know that we have a new file created and it looks pretty blank. So let's go into your other code. I really wish Visual Studio Code would let me have both of them open. It likes to keep closing one of them on me. I'm going to open up your, what do I do with it? Your Navbar code. Okay, so we have a doc type. It is using Bootstrap 4 in your existing code, which is great because we already have Bootstrap installed in our Meteor project.
Actually, the Bootstrap, I just included it, but I didn't use Bootstrap.
Okay.
I just used pure HTML.
Okay.
I mean CSS.
So I'm just gonna copy all this code and put it right in here. And I'm gonna even take out our div class name container. And so if I go into that code that's running, it looks hideous. Okay, well, why does it look hideous? Why doesn't it look like this? Well, it's because we haven't put in our CSS yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up your style.css file. And in our UI, we're going to create a new file called navbar.css, or we'll just call it navbar.css. Okay, so I'm going to copy this code and put it in my navbar.css. I'm going to go back to my app, and it still looks hideous. Well, why? Because we haven't told our React code or our Meteor code to go out and include that CSS in our actual file. So I'm going to come in here, and just like we would import any other JavaScript file, we're going to import our navbar.css. I'm going to save that. And all of a sudden, we're almost there. The only thing that it looks like is happening here is we have some padding on this one that we didn't have on this one. So I'm going to go into inspect element because I don't want to make any assumptions on where that padding is coming from. And I'm going to click right on our body. And I'm going to scroll here. It looks like our body has 10 pixels of padding on it. So we can just go right into our navbar CSS and do a new line that says body padding 0. Now we have this running in our Meteor code, and we also have it running here. The zoom I have set a little different, which is why it looks a little different. But now we copied that over, we're good to go. But just to prove this is working, let's go to our navbar.js, and instead of our contact link going to nowhere, essentially, we're going to have it just go to our home page, or let's be even fancier. Let's have it go to our hello world. So I'll save that there. I'll go to our contact, and now we're on our hello world page. And if I go to our hello world page, I can add an A tag to go to our /navbar. And I'll save that. It should appear here in just a second. And if I click on go to nav, it takes me back to that page.
So I just saw that you did not install CSS.
We don't need to install CSS because CSS is accessible in any browser. What we would have to install is Sass or SCSS if we decided to use SCSS files. However, in this project, we do already have our Sass installed. And we did that with the 4.7 SCSS package.
I see.
So if we wanted to get this up and running with a blank Meteor project, we totally could. We could use Meteor create and then start editing those files. Even if you start with a blank Meteor project, there are still going to be files in there by default. You know, we had one called links.js that showed up in our API. We had some code that ran in the startup, and then I believe there was a button that said click me. So it doesn't matter if you're going to start from an existing project or start with a near blank one. There's always going to be some work to integrate an existing code base in with a new framework. And in fact, that's something that I did today. Is we started a new project and I had to make a decision. I was like, do I either want to make this from scratch, or do I want to duplicate a project that already exists and then delete out a lot of the code? And because the new project shared a lot of the same packages and had the same layout, I decided to use an existing project. However, most of the time, I will decide to start completely blank and build it up from there. And you get really good at memorizing what packages you use over and over again. Packages like Moment or like SCSS or like React itself.
And before we move on to the next thing, I was trying to get the menu bar, like the 3 lines going across those 3 divs. And in my CSS, when you go in Meteor, the CSS file, the line,
okay.
For some reason it's not showing up. So,
okay, so let's shrink down your screen here. And we have it showing kind of big. Okay, so let's look. Menu bar, we have our lines. So my solution to this is not the solution I should give as an instructor. My solution as an instructor should be, well, let's figure out why it's not showing. My solution as a real world developer would be just use Bootstrap, because Bootstrap does have a nav class built into it. With that said, let's see if we can't get this running. So basically what we want to do is when the hamburger menu, when we hit a certain size, we want to hide nav links and just show the hamburger, right? So the nav links we are actually going to display none on.
Okay.
And let me just look at your code again. So nav links is here. So basically we do want that hamburger menu to still show up. So let's look at your hamburger. So I think actually what you wanted to do was put this on your nav instead of your nav links.
Oh.
And then you probably don't want your height to be 100%. You want it just to be natural. And then on your nav links, you want to display none. And there's your hamburger menu that's showing up. Now, the only other issue you have is now we can't see the text underneath it. Yeah. And that's because you have your nav position fixed. So if we just take out that line and make it what it defaults to, oh, that did not work either. Let's put that back to fixed. And then what we will do is on your nav bar, you have your landing. So we will, let's refresh that. Okay, on our landing class, we will add a margin top to it. And it looks like your nav is 10 VH. right? So it's dynamic. So we will add onto your landing a dynamic margin top. Well, that didn't do what I wanted it to. Class landing. Well, that's interesting. Do I need to make it class name? I don't think I do. No. Classes are landing. Put a margin top, maybe a padding top, although there we go. So now we can see it. And then we would have to write some JavaScript to make it so when you click on that nav bar or hover over it, it's going to show your links.
What I was trying to do though was like when you saw when you made the screen smaller, you saw how it responded by just dropping down the link. That's what. I was trying to have that while at the same time having the sidebar. I don't know. It was just maybe it was a little too much.
Yeah, so what you could do, building out a nav bar from scratch is really hard. It's one of those things that on the surface looks pretty easy, but when you start getting into it and making the behavior perform properly and make it expand out, that gets really tricky. That's why I default to using Bootstrap's nav and then customizing Bootstrap's nav however I would need it. So what I would do is I would go to the Bootstrap site. It's totally possible to write out your own JavaScript to toggle the fact that this nav links is set to display none. Because if we pull this open, we do get our links working properly. But what we would have to then do is write some code to basically say, well, when we click on this, toggle the nav links to not be display none anymore because we want them to show up.
Right.
But what I would personally do just to show you the alternative is if I grab the nav bar from Bootstrap, I know there's a lot of code in here, but what I'm just going to do is I'm going to comment out yours and I'll paste this in. And it's going to yell at me because maybe I didn't grab it all. No, I definitely did.
And I do want to use Bootstrap, but sometimes it's just like I'm not comfortable with it. So it's a little bit difficult to kind of like follow along what it's doing exactly. And then I'm using also CSS or Sass, which can get complicated having both the styling of both Bootstrap and CSS. I don't know which one is playing.
Sometimes when you look at the first example in Bootstrap, it's very overwhelming. Like this is a hell of a lot of code in here, right? Yeah. And it's really tough to tell what each one of these things are doing. But if we scroll down, we can see much more simple options. And if we keep going, we see maybe something that's a little bit more complicated, but not super complicated. So let's just take this nav and put it in your code. And then let's go back to see what that looks like. So I'm going to refresh that. We see our nav bar here. And if we click, oh, we don't have jQuery included. So I don't know that that's going to work. So in order to get this to work, we would also have to include jQuery. Which we can do. jQuery Meteor. Let me just see if there's an easier way to add jQuery. Yeah, so we're going to go to our server. We will Meteor add jQuery. And we will fire our server back up, and I'm going to refresh in here. So I have found, now this is my personal bias and a bunch of front-end developers would argue with me here, but I have found that whenever you do custom CSS, it gets very hairy, especially when you start working with media queries, which is why I try and stay as much in Bootstrap as possible. With that said, there are definitely times that I want to be able to customize the navbar. Like I don't want it to be gray. So what I would do is I would go into inspect. I would find out where it's getting set as gray. And it looks like it's this BG light, but more importantly, it's getting set on nav class, right? And we see all of these things that are getting listed out. So I would find that in our navbar code, which it looks like it's here, and I would add my own custom class called BG blue, and then go to my own code and create a new one called BG blue, and then look exactly at how they're doing it in their code. So they're using a background color, and we'll just say blue, and we'll save that and refresh in here, and it's still not there. That's because they're using this important tag, right? So we can see that our code is getting overwritten because it's not using important. So I will throw in our important tag, and now our navbar is blue. That still doesn't fix our issue with our menu not working. And I'm wondering if that's because we're using class instead of class name. And we have to use class name because we are in React code. So I'm going to save that. And it has an issue with tab index because in React we camel case our properties. And that still doesn't work. Well, that came back to bite me in the ass. I thought that would work.
Do you need to have a Bootstrap UI.js or whatever the name of the actual like JavaScript library is?
The JavaScript library, I'm pretty sure just, oh, maybe you're right, Meteor Bootstrap JS. I thought that just came in. I thought that came in with my NPM package, but I'm wondering.
It might just need to be imported on the component or something.
Yeah, I'm just wondering where to do it. Let's look at our main.jsx. No, where do I pull in? Do I do that in app? I pull in that Sask. Oh, I do it as an import in my. I do it there. Let's see if our node module contains some code to do that. So this is a great example of if I were doing this in straight up HTML and CSS, I would just go out to a CDN and drop in our Bootstrap JavaScript code. But because I'm doing it in Meteor, it looks like I have to do it a little different. So I'm going to, in our navbar.js, I'm going to try and import from our node modules, Bootstrap, JavaScript, dist. And the way I'm generating all of that is I went to our node modules folder and I found Bootstrap, JavaScript, and that had a dist folder on it, and that has an index.js. And that still didn't work. So what I'm doing now is just seeing if I have access to jQuery, because most of Bootstrap does require jQuery to work. And jQuery is installed because we use this $ here. It is basically saying, hey, when you find jQuery, console log out that it's running. So we definitely have jQuery. I'm not quite sure why that nav isn't working. I really thought that dropping that in would be a silver bullet, and it normally is. But I don't want to hog too much of other question time. I will take a look at this a little later and post code of how to get it working. I am a little surprised that it is not. Oh, they pull in bootstrap.bundle, but that's a older version. Oh, you might need, if dropdowns are not working, you might need Popper.js. Let's just drop that in and see if we get any. I'm going to install that, and I'm also going to Bootstrap uses another library called Popper.js because getting Navbars to work properly with Hamburger menus is so complicated. They actually use another library to do it. It's one of only 2 dependencies of Bootstrap, the other, of course, being jQuery. And so I'm wondering if I need to add Popper as well. And then start our server back up. That still is not working. All right, I will put this on hold for a second. I will get this working a little later and give you guys a solution when I do. the one quick fix we can do is go to Bootstrap's website and go get a CDN link, and we can put the JavaScript code into our head title, our head section in main.js. And I'm going to take this out, and I believe that should make it work. It still isn't working. Oh, it's refreshing. Grab the wrong link. We want to include the complete bundle, not just the basic code. And it still has problems. All right, I am actually gonna stop on this, and I will let you know when I do have it working.
Sounds good.
But I totally hear you on it can get confusing mixing in Bootstrap with your own code. And I completely just disprove my point that Bootstrap is easier to use. However, once you get it set up, it normally is much easier to use and then customize on top of than it is to try and build out your own CSS.
Yeah, I think with more practice, probably over time, it'll get easier.
Definitely with more practice. And the other thing is it may be easier to get everything up without Bootstrap and do your own CSS. And then when you get into mobile responsiveness, you find that the CSS that you wrote, you now need to write 3 times as much to get it to show up right on mobile. Where in Bootstrap, it would be as simple as adding a -md to your column to get it to wrap properly.
I think this is why Jeremy recommended also something called Tailwinds, I think. Tailwinds, which is kind of like Bootstrap. It gives you a lot more control for things like color and size and all of that. I remember watching a video at the time, and I think that was his concern, that he spent more time trying to overwrite Bootstrap than actually, that in the end, it didn't necessarily save him time or effort.
Yeah, that's not something that I've run into. I have found Bootstrap to be very easy to customize. With that said, the more and more you try and make Bootstrap not look like Bootstrap you do border on that point. Right. With that said, I would always recommend any CSS framework over trying to do it yourself. So if you don't like Bootstrap, you can definitely try and use Tailwind. You can try and use Foundation as another option out there. There is no one answer.
Do you say Foundation?
Foundation is another one. I'll post both of these links into resources.
Okay.
That paren system where you could just add, like just change the colors, and as I recall, like I didn't really use it at any great length, but I remember watching a video at the time.
Yeah, there are a lot of options out there. Bootstrap is definitely the biggest one and the most popular. It's used on a ton of different websites. It's what I recommend. But again, this is something that you could survey all the different instructors, and they're all going to give you different answers. And the other thing on this is that front-end web developers are going to have a very different answer on Bootstrap than back-end developers.
Right.
So because my experience is primarily, because I spend more time in the back end, for me, I just want to get up a quick website. The company just launched a new website. Our domain is wearetuzag.com. And this is the site that we launched. And if you look at this, none of this really looks particularly bootstrappy. But with that said, 100% of this site is built in Bootstrap, and then we did some customizations on top of it. So, getting this this Navbar menu to go into the Hamburger and respond like that would have been a nightmare if I tried to do that without Bootstrap. There are other things that we do in here, like when we get to a certain screen size, we show the text as one column, but if we pull it open, it splits into two. There are just a lot of things in Bootstrap, like this column layout, where if we pull it in, it wraps and becomes one long column and shows the image underneath it. Those are all things that Bootstrap just does very well with its grid system. And there are a bunch of other components that we use in here, like buttons. Oh, that's a bug. Take a screenshot of that to fix that one later. So I really rave about Bootstrap. There are a lot of other CSS frameworks out there. The one thing that I would say is stick with it and try and use it throughout an entire project. And don't get frustrated when it's not doing the one specific thing that you want, and keep at it, because 9 times out of 10, it's going to be easier to figure out how to get it to do what you want than it is to write your own and then realize you have to write even more code to be responsive. Linda, I'm just seeing your post. I will try this code. I don't know that it will help, but we can definitely try. Let's see. Well, that's interesting. I will come back to that one. Linda, your code definitely helped. It's just a little odd that it is not displaying properly. Anyway, I will come back to that one. Other questions? Anna, was that helpful?
Yeah, it
Okay.
was.
Other questions?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. So yesterday I went home to do like either like a form or like a login thing for, you know, like a new customer or something, and I didn't get very far. I was sad.
Okay. Do you want to share the code that you have, or do you need some guidance on that?
I tried to yesterday, and you know, my Git is acting all up, so I don't really know what to do.
You can just share your screen right in Zoom if you want, and we can take a look at it.
Okay. Oh wait, it's in the sandbox. Yeah. Sorry, I should have been more prepared. All right, there we go. So, all right, so I got the VS Code open. That's great. And then now I can screen share my Zoom here.
Yep.
And how do we do that?
There should be a green share button at the bottom of Zoom.
I am not full screen.
Is there something in the menu that you need?
Something in the menu.
I can't screen share it with you because this window goes away when I start a screen share, but it's the.
Oh.
Are you in the Zoom app, or did you join through the Zoom Chrome?
Oh. I didn't know there were two. I guess I've been joining through the browser.
Okay, so you might need to download the Zoom app in order to screen share. The other option is, well, let me send you this link.
Oh, wait. Okay. Because I shared my screen.
There you go. That worked.
Awesome. Good job. Thank you. Yay. Very exciting. So there's that guy. And there's and then there's that stuff in there. Okay, so what do we want to look at first?
Up to you.
Okay. Well, honestly, I don't even know like what is the most important. Like, for example, the browser was telling me that I had a error saying it couldn't find the links.js file. Now, I remember we deleted that because we, didn't need it. And then for some reason, it's still looking for it. And I didn't know where else to delete that. I'm going to look for this file.
Okay, so let's go ahead and delete links.js.
Okay.
Because we definitely don't need it.
Legit.
And then let's fire up our Meteor server in a terminal.
Okay.
And the reason why we want to do that is because when Meteor or really any other tool that you're using throws an error, it normally likes to help you and tell you where it can't find that file or where it's trying to import that file.
Mm-hmm.
So I am hoping, okay, so we have a bunch of errors there. So let's try and drag out your window so we can read that terminal a little bit better. Perfect. And then let's scroll up. And it says, okay, so cannot find module import API links. So Meteor is going to spite me and not tell me where we're going to use that. So instead, we're going to go to search over on the left, right underneath your file structure. And we will do a search for, sorry, yep, that's it. And go ahead and do a search for /import/API/links. And if we hit enter there, it tells us that our main.js file is trying to import links. So if we click on import links over on the left sidebar there, it should open up the file. And we find in our main JS that it's importing links still. So let's go ahead and delete that out. And if we save the file and scroll all the way down in our terminal,
make the server go again?
We should just have to scroll up a little bit. And now we have a different error. Now we have reference error links is not defined. So if we look in this code a little bit more, we see that we're using links right here. So we aren't using links. We got rid of that. So
yeah, we should get rid of all this, right?
Exactly. So you can go ahead and delete line 10 all the way down until a little bit lower. Keep going down, keep going down.
That makes sense because I didn't want to delete startup altogether because I knew we had like a startup folder that we put startup-y things in.
Yep.
This here, is useless.
Yep. So keep going down, and a little too far, just until that line 30.
Yes.
And so if we delete that, we now have an empty startup. So let's save. And let's scroll down to the bottom of your terminal. And our app is running.
It's running. Yay. Very exciting. So that's great. Thanks.
Yep. Happy to answer any other questions you might have or any of the other students.
Can we like run through how to do the either like start up a form or the login?
Yeah, so both of those are a little different. I think the form might be a little bit more beneficial, only because we've done login on the video. So let's go over a basic form. So go ahead to your main.jsx.
Main.jsx.
I lied. That's not where we want to be. Let's go to your files and go to UI and open up app.jsx. Okay, so in here, let's just do a new form right in our right in here.
Okay. This bothers me because I got rid of those.
So you definitely want to get rid of it there as well.
Awesome.
Okay. So how much of a form do you want to do? Do you just want to get it showing on the front end? Do you want to go through the whole back end connection? How much are we talking about here?
Well, let's just start with the front end.
Okay.
And maybe I can get the back end.
Okay.
Later.
So let's do, first of all, let's make sure that we can see this code. So let's open up a browser and go to localhost 3000. Okay.
Yay.
So we have that set up. Now, one thing I noticed is we don't have Bootstrap. And Bootstrap is going to make our form look a lot better. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our terminal and we're going to Control-C to stop Meteor. And we are going to run a command Meteor add 47, all is one word spelled out, colon SCSS. And we're going to hit enter. And that's going to let us import our SAS that Bootstrap is going to give us. While we are here, we're also going to wait for this to finish loading. I'm going to kick my dog out of the room because I am sick of her chewing on her bone, and I will be right back.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh.
Okay, we're going to also install Meteor. So go ahead and type in Meteor npm install -- save, and we are going to install Bootstrap as well.
What?
And so the reason why we're installing it with npm instead of add is if it is a Meteor-based package, if this package is only for Meteor, we use add. But if it's coming from the bigger npm ecosystem and we can use it anywhere in JavaScript code, we use npm. Mm-hmm. So we're going to go to our main.css file over here.
Okay.
And now we need to tell our code to use Bootstrap and import that. So what that is going to look like is I'm just going to Slack it to you directly.
Okay.
And you can copy and paste it in.
They're both empty.
So go ahead and copy that code. Oops. And go ahead and paste that up on line 1. And then take out that edited part and those back ticks as well. And at line, the first character on that line. Okay, great. So let's save that. Let's go back to our code in Chrome. Oh, first of all, let's turn the Meteor server back on. Sorry, I forgot about that. So go ahead and type in Meteor, enter. And then if we go back to our browser and open up the localhost 3000 that we had running and refresh that page, and give it a second because the server is still booting up.
Server.
We
Well,
see the font change.
that's different.
So all of a sudden it looks better. So let's go and get our form in. So let's go to let's go to app.jsx. And now we can use all the Bootstrap classes we want, and it's going to show up prettier. So
Yay.
let's do on line 7 a form HTML tag. And let's hit enter. And let's do a div class in there. And we're going to do class name because we're in React world. And let's call that form-control in quotes. I lied. Call that form-group. And let's close that div tag. We're going to put some content in there. So don't do a slash close, just do the arrow. And then come outside of that. And now we're going to do our closing slash div because I always, whenever I open a div, I close the div.
Yeah.
And now inside of that, let's do a input tag. And on there, we are going to do a class name of form-control. And let's save this and see what it looks like.
It already looks like something and there's like nothing in it.
So we have our input and it is rounded out, which, you know, looks nice. So let's add maybe a label to it and a button.
Okay.
So let's first of all get rid of this slash that's hanging out there because that I think is a mistake.
Yeah, it's just like chilling there. And I rendered on the page and was like, where did you come from?
And so let's do a new line between 8 and 9. So just hit enter on, yep, right there. And let's do a label tag. And we'll label it, let's just call it name inside the contents of the tag. Okay, and then underneath our input, after line 15, we're going to do a button tag. BU is spelled out.
Oh, spelled all the way out.
And that is going to have 2 class names on it. So do a class name equals And we are going to make that BTN and then BTN-success inside the class name. Yep.
/6.
Dash. And then inside our button, we'll say save. And save. And let's look in our browser.
Whoa.
And now we have
Look at
our
that.
name tag and a nice button and our form input.
Great. I could probably make a little bit more of a form like that.
And a good thing to note is if you go to getbootstrap.com, they have a whole section on forms to show you all the different ways of styling it, all the different components you can use, a bunch of fun stuff that's in there.
Awesome. Very exciting. Thank you very much.
No problem.
That's great. Okay, I'm good for now.
Okay. Anyone else with questions? Anyone at all?
I mean, if there's no one else, we could rock some backend.
I don't want to go too far only because I know all of those things that I like getting a basic form working, I know is covered in the video. So unless you have any specific questions about that video, I don't want to go too far down that path.
Okay. Awesome.
So if anyone has any questions, feel free to chime in. I'm here. I'm actually working on that Meteor code, trying to figure out why the navbar wasn't working in the first place. But if anyone has questions, please feel free to chime in and ask them.
Hi, Max. Not so much a question, but just we've learned like so many different ways to do some simple things now, like the hamburger bars and stuff. Like we used one awesome with Jeff, and that all would work with this, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it's just a matter of personal preference.
Yeah, matter of personal preference, also a matter of scoping out the project. Right. So if you're working on a very basic website, and let's say your portfolio website, I don't know that I use Bootstrap at all in my portfolio website.
Right.
And it's because I have so few components in there, I don't need the whole Bootstrap library. And I wanted a really custom feel on it. So because of that, as much as I love Bootstrap, I actually didn't use it on my own personal website.
Okay.
So it comes down to personal preference. It also comes down to looking at the project. If you're building out a big website that's going to have a lot of different layout things and it needs to be mobile responsive, Bootstrap is going to be a great option. Okay. If you're looking at something very niche and very with a little content and a lot of layout and styling things, maybe Bootstrap isn't the right option.
Okay. Well, like, for example, for responsiveness, we use that mix-in. We used a mix-in, the Beast mix-in.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have to do that if we're basically are using Bootstrap?
If you're using the Bootstrap grid, which is just a one component in Bootstrap, then no, you wouldn't have to write your own mix-ins.
Oh, that's cool. Okay. Thanks. I'm going to mute before the dogs erupt again.
Okay. All right, because there are no more questions, do we want to end the stream and kick off our fourth a little early, or do you want me to keep it open in case you guys think of anything in the next 30-ish minutes? Okay, in that case, I'm going to wrap it up here. I will work on that Meteor navbar code and figure out why it's not working in Meteor. That is a great example of when using a framework can go wrong. Is Meteor and Bootstrap, what I think is happening right now is Meteor and Bootstrap are butting heads. And Meteor wants a couple of dependencies and jQuery wants a couple of dependencies, and jQuery doesn't like the fact that Meteor is the one who's installing and managing those dependencies. So what I am going to try and iron out is why that's happening. We've seen in other Bootstrap projects how easy it is to use Bootstrap by just adding in a link and a script tag, and then it's good to go and working. Clearly, that's not happening here. So there are times that using a framework is only going to complicate things. And this is one of those times. So I am going to work on figuring out why they are not working together. And the reason why I'm going to spend time on that is in case you guys do decide to use Meteor and React for your capstone projects, you'll have an example code base of the Bootstrap code that is fully functional. But that's something that's just going to take me a little time to figure out. So I will post that for you guys. A reminder that there is no class tomorrow. It's 4th of July. Enjoy the holiday. And then next week, Gus will be back to talk about infrastructure and deployment. Another reminder to make sure you're filling out your weekly feedbacks. Those are super important for us. And I believe that is it. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to Slack me. I'm happy to jump into a video call with you right on Slack, or you can always schedule some time with me at my calendar link as well. Last call for any questions before I end the stream. Okay, I will see you guys later.